Hello, everybody. This is Anna and Brian from Amata World podcast. And today we have our next guest for Web3 episode, James Zaki, who is a developer relations engineer at Aztec and as well a host of London's weekly Web3 workshops. Hi, James. How are you?
Hi, guys. Good to see you.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining. And maybe can you give a quick introduction to yourself and your background so our listeners know your story?
Yeah. I think it's been a while since I've last been on. But yeah, my background's been in engineering for most of my life. I sort of put it as like engineer and educator because I've always done sort of education initiatives on the side. So, currently I'm working as a developer relations engineer at Aztec. Before that, I was at the Ethereum Foundation's privacy and scaling exploration team. And since moving to London, I've been running, weekly Web3 workshops where a group of us gather and talk about stuff relating to Web3 from code up to product, like everything in between in the tech front.
It's nice. And we always ask this question to our guests, like, how did you first get into the Web3 industry? And we kind of talked about it before, but maybe it's useful to just go through it again and maybe touch on how did you get started with the workshops as well? Because I think that's a really interesting story.
Yeah, so I probably mentioned the story of how I basically was in a community choir, and then someone in the bass section said, "Hey, James, I think you'd really like Ethereum." And I'm like, what's that? And then I looked into the tech and the ethos behind it, and I'm like, oh yeah, he was right. I would definitely like this. And then I found some local workshops near me that were doing that. And when I looked up the workshops, these were Bocky's weekly workshops, and I started attending these and starting to help run some of them or run some workshops here and there. I realized, this is a great way to learn with a small group of people and just talking about Ethereum the whole time. And then when I moved to London more than 2 years ago now, I didn't quite find that. I found bigger meetups, a lot of sort of pub meetups as well. It was every weekday was a DAO, but then I couldn't quite find that same tech chat vibe. So I just started running weekly workshops, and I've kept running those and onwards and upwards with them.
I just want to touch on that. That's all right. I just want to touch on something about that as well. Like, so you were introduced to Ethereum, but I think at the time there was probably a lot of other chains sort of, blossoming and coming out from the woodwork. So why Ethereum? What was the one that sort of grabbed you?
Yeah, I think when I first got into it in Australia in 2017, I think, there wasn't too much at the time in a sense, like at least the attention I could see from the workshops I was attending was around that. Down the line, of course, others started popping up, but then I would always I would think about, for me, what longevity meant for a network, like what is sort of necessary for something to be long-lived. And it isn't sort of, it's hard to explain, but there are just a few things with how each time I looked at Ethereum and how it was run, or how sort of EIPs are done and how delivery was rolling out with the tech front, I thought, okay, this has legs to evolve and be something meaningful and sort of useful for a long period of time. Whereas, Bitcoin, of course, has it's sort of finished in a sense, like it's doing what it does and that's what it will do until it, maybe things change, but it's maybe harder for it to pivot. Whereas I just see Ethereum evolving quite rapidly and doing a lot more than just be the currency. It can be like sort of more programmable, it's just like from a product point of view, it has more ability to pivot and not necessarily hard pivot. I should just say iterate and refine itself than maybe other chains. Whereas on the flip side, you've got newer chains that maybe just evolve quite quickly for a specific niche, and that's what they do, and that's all they do. And I'm like, well, isn't that just like a product then? That may as well just be a Web2 application. It's not always as decentralized as it may seem. So it's this interesting blend of like stability and decentralization.
And can we probably should cover a little bit about your current work and what you're doing at Aztec as well, and how different it is from like the other Web3 related.
Yeah, so I currently as a developer relations engineer, it's sort of combining the two things I've always done sort of that were separate. So I've always worked as an engineer, and always on the side I've in some way or another done community education, whether it's through, in high school I was doing tutoring for primary school, through university I was a tutor. I often ended up in team lead roles where I'm sort of helping people on board, but then outside of work I would do sort of other workshops. So I was attending and then helping run the monthly IoT workshops in Sydney. I was then doing the Ethereum workshops with Boki and others. Like the whole idea was that would run in a decentralized way. And so in a sense, the position like developer relations does combine those two. And so that was probably how I ended up there. It's sort of my first time working as DevRel, and it's kind of interesting that you get to do sort of both on the job rather than engineering all day and then outside of that trying to do the education. It's sort of combined in a way.
Yeah, so I'd like to maybe talk a little bit more about the current state in the industry. Like, what's your thoughts on like where Web3 is currently at? There was a lot of hype maybe a year or so ago on like the promise of Web3, and now it kind of feels like it's a little bit fizzled out. Like, what do you think? Is that a good thing for the industry, or like miss the old days?
It's interesting. Like I've sort of been through other tech waves, so I sort of have this sense of how certain technologies can come and go based on maybe hardware, for example, or based on other advances. And the one example I refer to is when I was getting into university, I was really interested in artificial intelligence and the algorithms that were used. And then I made that part of my thesis, my engineering thesis. But even when I first started studying that and looking into it, I think it was 98, end of 98, early 99, when I sort of got into uni. I bought a book on programming, and part of it was around AI because I was just fascinated by it. But then at university, the lecturers said, oh, well, AI sort of has its hypes and it goes down because people expect certain things of it, but it doesn't deliver to the expectation, even though it's still progressing very well. So people are sort of, it's just an expectation management thing, I think. So the hype is unfortunately what makes the perception of something worse. Like it may still be progressing steadily, but the hype is to say, oh, well, we don't have walking robots in our home. AI is terrible. And so, but then again, all these algorithms that were doing machine learning and data analysis were working with analytics in backends of Web 2 applications. So it was definitely, doing great things, but no one saw their talking robots at home. So that was sort of the perception thing. And unfortunately, that perception would, at the time, maybe influence funding, for the projects they were doing at the mechatronics department. So that was an interesting, sort of cycle that I've seen. And then now we come some decades later, a couple of decades later, at least. And like, look at AI now. Like it's now everywhere, but it's slightly different. I'd considered neural networks for my thesis, but I ended up using some other machine learning algorithm. But it is in a sense just neural networks, but with massive hardware, with enough hardware and speed to do a lot more with it. So to bring it back to Ethereum, I think maybe there's the thoughts of what this could bring. Like, we think it's going to free the world and give us everything all at once. Yeah, unfortunately, that might not happen so quickly. But again, if you sort of look at the technological evolution, you do see the pieces sort of progressing. And I think the difference with something like Ethereum is that it's both a technology and obviously the finance, as well as the impact on society is sort of tied together a lot more, I think, than just, say, robot technology. So yeah, when it comes to those three things progressing, they're progressing steadily, but maybe not in the ways that we all might be thinking they're going to change the world at once.
And maybe as well, just like we usually ask for advice and during the workshops. So what do you see? How people perceive the Web3 industry, how it's changing right now? What kind of like helpful bits you can advise if they want to get into the industry?
Yeah.
Starting out in the current climate. So this is...
Yeah, no, it's a good shout. There's, I think many ways people can get involved. There's obviously just reading about it, listening to podcasts, of course, like Amata World, hearing people talk about it, as well as, what you can find in the domain you're interested in. So I think if someone's not in the Web3 domain, so maybe they're not in the pure tech or immediately sort of at the coal front, so to speak, then sure, maybe start sort of with your domain and see if people are talking about the use of these technologies in your domain. So if you are in real world assets, maybe you're in agriculture, then you think, okay, well, I have this agricultural software. Can I do something that involves Web3 primitives or Ethereum for traceability? Can that help? And that's sort of one of my first projects that I worked on as well, was a company that did agriculture, and they software for farmers, basically. And then because they're around real world assets, they're considering, well, how do we tie in this transfer of the asset in an immutable ledger that all of them can access independently? And it just sort of fit like that. So sometimes you'll find an application that fits. So I think that's one angle, just to say, coming from a work point of view, a product point of view, is there some application of it? From the other can be just purely curiosity. Like if you're interested in the technology or interested in how it can be used and what's possible, then reading about that and dabbling with writing some applications then could be an interesting start as well.
Yeah, because I think you also mentioned earlier that, there are perhaps other chains that sort of niche down into certain areas. What's your sort of impression of all the other sort of technologies now, and how important is it for people to look at sort of what these different chains niche into? Maybe you can also give us, I don't know, a quick overview of what you think are a couple of standout different technologies out there.
I think it's just interesting to see different approaches, for example. So even we can look at the approach that Cardano took to its development and how it sort of focused on the academic side of things and then trying to build things. And then I'm not sure where it's at now in terms of applications building on it. I understand there's a lot of alt L1s that will be, giving out a lot of grants to try attract people to build on that platform. And the thing is, it may have now that they're given, I guess, the decentralized nature of Ethereum, the other alt L1s sort of need to step up and do that as well. And even with L2s, like L2s building on Ethereum start off in a more centralized way. So they, so they're being encouraged to be more decentralized and sort of, because that's the capability we'll want. I think if some, say, network and storage and execution of business logic occurs on a more centralized server for a niche community, just have a server for it. Like if it's focusing on gaming and gaming assets, and you have to trust the majority of people, if you have to trust the a small number of people for that to be the case, maybe just have a game server with a company entity that people have to trust anyway and is bound by some law, if that's what it is. Like if there's, it's the product sort of has to fit, and sometimes decentralization is put out there, but maybe it's not as decentralized as people think. And then if decentralization doesn't matter for that application, then do you really need a blockchain? And I've often done that in talks from when I first got into the space. With someone in Australia, Adriana, it's always like, do you really need a blockchain? Was the question we'd often ask of these things. So that's sort of my reflection on that, to say, if it's very decentralized and doing things that need it, brilliant. And that's why I sort of look for simplicity. I just sort of look at Ethereum and I say, look, it's very stable, very decentralized. It can serve that purpose very well. Let's make it better, easy to use, get more applications to benefit from that capability. But if you have a gaming industry or a niche industry that maybe doesn't need decentralization and is trusting a small number of people, then it doesn't need a blockchain.
Yeah, I think during that, when there was a lot of hype around it, then there were a bunch of projects that they didn't really need blockchain to use that, but it's just because everyone is using it, and it's just let's jump on it. But maybe from your perspective, do you have any kind of examples when you're just you have to use it? Or, for example, you think where Web3, blockchain, crypto can actually sort out the issue in the world that still is not kind of like sorted out.
It's something I chew on a lot because it is sometimes can seem hard to articulate, and which is understandable. Then, like that, people say that blockchains are a solution looking for a problem, and I totally empathize with that point of view as well, because I like to play devil's advocate with where I'm coming from and try to challenge myself in that way. So the way I articulate, I think I read it once a while back. It was like a flow chart. Do you need a blockchain? And it was like, if you have a database that a group of people need to write to, they don't trust each other and they don't have a trusted third party, then a blockchain can be helpful. So that's where you get just like the generic concept of needing a ledger to say that, in a supply chain, for example, you have multiple competing actors along the way. They're not necessarily going to trust each other because they're passing an asset between them, the transport company, the storage company, the customers. And each step along the way, those people need to write something about this asset, but they don't trust each other. And they don't necessarily have a trusted third party because the asset is going between borders, between countries. So a distributed ledger helps in that case. So something like a blockchain can have some programmability around the payments. You can codify insurance to some degree with attestable data. Like it sort of makes sense for that kind of an application, and that for me is quite a strong and clear one. The other attribute I like around decentralization is kind of like the lore of Vitalik's I forget what game it was, World of Warcraft weapon that the game took away from him. And so, I don't know how true it is completely, but it's possible for a centralized gaming platform to just decide that this weapon is no longer existing and delete it. And so the thought there is around the interoperability of your assets. Like, can I digitally own something that is independent of the platforms? And I think that's a very powerful case as well, to say, well, does it have to be just a gaming asset? No, it can be my data. I can say, I want to have my passport information private, and then I will share pieces of it with those who need it, but not the whole thing. I'll let you verify that. I mean, I'm going to lean into ZK here as well, but using zero knowledge proofs, you can prove part of your information to those who need it with your consent, in a sense. And I think that's what it helps with as well, by empowering the individual to consent to the use of their data at the source, which they hold, or at least they control. They don't have to store it themselves. They can have it as other ways, perhaps. But the idea is that you're holding things yourself and you're allowing people to use it for the benefit of the products you use, but without oversharing and without a centralized entity being able to take advantage of that power dynamic.
So I think you touched on something there, like ZK, which is something relatively new into, I think, a lot of the Web3 technologies out there, and sort of a breakthrough moment that happened, I can't remember exactly when, sometime last year, perhaps. But like thinking of Web3, comparing it with sort of many years back when you first started, I think there's probably been a couple more developments. Like what do you,
100%.
What's your thoughts on sort of the latest developments in, some of the new features in sort of these Web3 technologies that make, might be more useful to different applications, I think.
Yeah, I think
we talked about, we talked about the supply chain sort of example, but I felt like that was something that we could have done a few years ago, but maybe now there's a lot more things we can do. Like, do you have any examples of that?
Yeah. So I guess on the ZK side, there were things around in 2018 that were very fresh, very new. And from what I've understood of the field of cryptography and the mathematics behind it, is that it normally takes a good decade for people to be comfortable with it before they'll use it as an application. But I think it's this combination of the finance with the technology and the impact to society that has really accelerated that. So I think from then to now, we see the cryptography really rolling, and Aztec's doing a lot in that front. To sort of, develop the cryptography around Plonk. If you've heard that term in that space, there's the Plonkish cryptography behind these proving systems. But in terms of the applications, like mentioning, say, ZK Passport that does that application of, I have my passport data and I will conditionally share, like I will choose to reveal parts of it that you can verify, but not see everything else. So I can prove my age is meeting your criteria without giving you my date of birth. But you can also attest to it being true. Those are, I guess, atomic, capabilities. Where they can be used, is quite broad. So, again, to use ZK Passport as an example, they were part of the DevCon ticketing system, such that if you proved you were from Southeast Asia, you could buy a discount ticket. They didn't need to see your passport. They didn't need to, check everything, do a face scan and all this, like a lot of the passport apps do have to do. They could instead just get a zero knowledge proof that you've provided from your passport via the ZK Passport app that said, yes, here is my country in my passport, signed by me, here's my name. So yeah, probably you reveal your name and your country, and that's the name you use with your email or whatever. And then that was enough to get you a discount ticket. And I think that's just quite elegant and beautiful and how we should be doing things. Whereas if you want to do anything else that requires something verifiable from your passport, you need to give them your everything, like your address and everything to prove that you're from somewhere, or not from somewhere, which is also a thing. I'm not sure if I fully answered the question there. That's maybe just one application with zero knowledge, but in terms of the supply chain application, absolutely, it was around 2018 that I was at that company looking at that technology, and which we were looking at Socrates and early ZK things that were just quite slow. They just weren't performant enough to deliver further product needs. But now that's probably changed. I guess decentralized file storage is the other part of it that's come a long way. Having Filecoin and IPFS to have that incentive layer. The alternative to that being Arweave, which has got a different offering, but also is a decentralized storage mechanism. And the other part that I think we don't see enough of is decentralized front ends. So I have heard about it, and there are some people in that space, but for whatever reason, it's not as strong. And I think that might be because front ends tend to sort of need to evolve quickly. But once it's a decentralized front end, people have to do sort of the version update of the software themselves, perhaps. Maybe they select what version they're looking at. But I'm sure there can be something novel there to tie that in sooner, so people don't have to trust centralized front ends that can get hacked. But that's another story.
I think, we've talked about some of the applications, but maybe it's worth bringing the conversation to talking about a couple of maybe companies or startups that are doing a couple of interesting things in the space. Do you have any that come to mind as a good example of people actually using Web3 to really for what purpose it's meant to be used for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel maybe I've been heads down a bit recently. I'm trying to think of what's fresh. I guess I think about Rotki app. It's a sort of, I guess, a tax app that lets you sort of look at sort of your transactions and sort of gather the data for that for tax purposes and other finance purposes. But that's more of a tool on top of Web3 rather than Web3 being used. And I always like to make that distinction. Is it like a Web3 product, which is Web3 first, or is it a product that benefits from Web3, which is just how I, again, try to articulate it. But yeah, what are some products that benefit from Web3? I think crowdfunding mechanisms, they do exist. And of course, there's a platform fee for that because the platform is doing the work to put things out. But if you do have, I think the mechanisms exist, but maybe the adoption to Web2 companies is where we're sort of missing things, which is, I think, what we always come back to with regards to a user's wallet. Like if a user has to manage their keys and the keys are in their phone and they lose their phone and they've lost their keys, therefore they've lost their account, that's a bit hard. But like with crowdfunding, maybe it's more than just putting money one way and then getting the product as a delayed, like a Kickstarter or something. I just can't remember the name. I think Beamer was one of them. But there were some other platforms that were trying to do crowdfunding for movies as well. And one was, had funded a movie. I can't remember. There's been a couple of different. Oh, perhaps. Yeah, there's been a few. Yeah. The one I remembered from a while back, and I'm not sure if what they're doing now, but they were basically trying to make each frame of a movie an NFT before the movie existed. So you could own a frame or a set of frames in a movie. So you could maybe buy a set of frames together and hope that it captured a good moment, or maybe you buy them scattered, or, maybe it was just like an auction and a free for all. And then if people knew the storyline, maybe they'd want to own a certain chunk of frames, hoping to get a really good moment. So that was an interesting concept, to say you could help the film industry in funding their films without there being like sort of a community-led funding effort that is sort of, verifiable ownership of the frame. But again, it's still, the hard part is this model of like, where is the trust assumption? So you obviously are paying and still trusting that the company delivers on that promise of the movie, but at least something is on record publicly and visibly that there is this ownership of these frames. And that can be respected in other applications. So that's the interoperability piece I find interesting. Like when we talk about maybe the game's asset, or even in this case, the frames, you may say, if you are holding one of these things, then I will give you a discount on that thing. That's hard to do currently. This interoperability piece between products is very much a one-to-one that you have to make every time. So, sort of Web3 can bring you that, but am I seeing that everywhere? No, not yet. Yeah.
I think it's just like, as well, going back to the films, I remember there was a project they used kind of like NFTs, but so for example, if you have a prop from a film set,
Nice.
you can actually have like a joint ownership, but it actually is stored in a vault somewhere. But
Yeah.
you kind of own a piece of film prop from your favorite like movie.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example of, what problem does Web3 solve? Like, in a sense, you would either have to have this film studio creating their own software platform that has this ownership, and that's not their core business, obviously. Like, they just probably would want a tool that does that for them. But if it's a third party that does it, if there's some other company that says, hey, we're going to be the prop managers of everyone's props, and then suddenly they're an intermediary and they can start to extract value by being in that position. But if you can say, hey, we're a prop company, but we don't have the tech for this, and they get to use the plumbing that is the decentralized infrastructure, boom, you've got individuals able to benefit from that directly without this intermediary that could be corrupt, that could become corrupted by the power they hold by holding too much data, too much value. It's just something we see. It adds value first, it is attractive, and then over time becomes extractive of the network they hold. So yeah, that's sort of the power of it, and I just think we're yet to realize it. And I think once it sort of clicks for some applications, it will then go like wildfire amongst others, because it would be companies that don't then do that will be less efficient. So they're actually going to then sort of lose out on the market. So if you've got some studio that is able to put their props out and actually sustain their future works thanks to their fans owning their props, they keep going, they keep doing. The others are searching for funding, trying to justify their thing, but then they're going to be like, wow, how are they getting their funding? Wow, they just put their props on the platform. Great. And as long as the entry barrier is lower and the cost remains low, then yeah, I believe it will spread like wildfire at that point.
And do you have any other hopes and predictions for the future of the field and your own projects as well?
Yeah. So I think from the Ethereum point of view, I think the recent upgrade with Spectra is quite interesting, to say you could have like what used to be just your wallet, and now you can actually put some smart contract behind it. So we're finally going to get smart accounts. And then the reason why I mentioned that low level tech with this upgrade is that to say, yes, we are now going to have better UX finally. Like it's always been improving, but that's one key thing I think is necessary to make the integration of the tech easier. In terms of my workshops, weekly workshops are happening. There's some recent news I'd love to announce, but I might not be able to say it just yet, around upcoming events in London. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled, and yeah, maybe I'll do a snap announcement back to you some other time. But yeah, there's more things to come.
Nice. And for people who do want to hear about this announcement, like where do they find you? How can they reach out? Like, where's the best channels to reach you? Yeah.
I guess on X I'm posting, not so much, but I do post things on X when I do. So that's probably the best way. James_Zaki, Zaki. That's probably the best way.
Nice. And then in your weekly workshops, where can they find it?
Oh yeah, that's on Humanitics. Maybe we'll have to put the link below.
Yeah,
but yeah, Humanitics is just like a nice platform that does sort of profits go to charities, and you sort of pay what you want for the ticket, and it's sort of capped, so you can't pay above a certain amount. But the idea is I'm trying to sort of imbue that, community collaboration side of things, that you are part of the workshops and we're all making it happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing this episode with us.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
It's been great having you on. So, and to our listeners who's stick around to this point, thanks for listening, and have a great day.
Yeah. Bye.